The sun had barely begun to rise when an urgent knock shattered the early morning calm. It was 6 a.m., a time usually reserved for quiet reflection over coffee, not for confrontations at the front door. Jack, the protagonist, rubbed his eyes in disbelief as he stumbled out of bed, thinking perhaps he was still dreaming. Little did he know that this moment would ignite a series of events that would unravel everything he believed to be true about his home. As he opened the door, the cool morning air rushed in, and there stood Karen, his neighbor and former friend, clad in pajama pants and a determined expression. Her hair was unkempt, but her demeanor exuded a surprising confidence that set alarm bells ringing in Jack's mind. "I need my keys," she declared, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. Jack blinked, momentarily stunned by the absurdity of her request. Karen had always been a bit eccentric, but today she seemed outright hostile. The weight of her statement hung heavy in the air. She claimed it was her house. Jack's heart raced as he attempted to process her words. How could she think that? This was his sanctuary, a place filled with memories of laughter and love, not just walls and a roof. "Karen, you're mistaken," he replied carefully, trying to understand what had brought her to this point. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It felt surreal that someone would come knocking at this hour with such wild demands. But as he looked back at Karen's fierce expression, he knew that this was no casual misunderstanding. This confrontation was just the beginning of a much deeper conflict that would test his patience and resolve like never before. To fully understand the gravity of Karen's claim, one must delve into the tangled history that connected Jack and her over the years. Jack had purchased his home 5 years prior, a charming little bungalow that captured his heart with its quaint character and inviting front porch. The neighborhood had felt like a warm embrace, especially with friendly faces like Karen, who lived next door for nearly a decade. At first, their relationship bloomed with neighborly camaraderie. They would share weekend barbecues, exchange gardening tips, and help each other with minor home repairs. However, the veneer of friendship began to crack when Karen's peculiar behavior surfaced more prominently. She often hosted gatherings that spiraled out of control, leading to late-night noise complaints from other neighbors. Jack found himself caught in the middle, attempting to maintain peace while occasionally confronting Karen about the disturbance. Complications intensified when Karen began to express financial difficulties. Rumors circulated that she had fallen behind on her mortgage payments, which made Jack uneasy but left him feeling helpless. He wanted to support her as a friend, but he also wanted to protect his home from any potential fallout. Tension simmered beneath the surface during interactions tinged with unspoken resentment. The pivotal moment came when Karen, frustrated and desperate, had suggested entertaining the idea of selling their properties together. Jack had been taken aback by her sudden push for an unusual partnership. He felt his sanctuary was being inflated into a business venture. It was a suggestion he quickly dismissed, reluctant to intertwine their lives any further. Now, standing on his doorstep at dawn with a wild accusation that shattered their once amicable bond, it was apparent that any remnants of friendship had disintegrated. As Jack listened to her demand for the keys, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was the culmination of unresolved tensions and unspoken grievances, an unpredictable climax of what had once been a neighborly relationship now teetering on the edge of chaos. The knock echoed through the stillness of the early morning, jolting Jack from the depths of a dream. Disoriented, he blinked against the faint light streaming in through the window as thoughts raced through his mind. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour? He glanced at the clock on his nightstand, its glow confirming his worst fears. It was just past 6 a.m. Jack rubbed the sleep from his eyes, trying to shake off the fog that enveloped him. The house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where he could relax and escape from the stress of the outside world. Yet, here he was, already on edge before even opening the door. Taking a deep breath, he hesitated, wondering if he should ignore it and hope the visitor would go away. But something urged him forward, a sense of obligation mixed with curiosity. He swung open the door, half expecting to see a neighbor with a harmless morning request, perhaps a borrowed tool or a quick hello. Instead, there stood Karen, looking worse for wear but radiating an unsettling intensity that sent shivers down Jack's spine. Her pajama pants hung loosely on her frame, and her hair stood askew, as if she hadn't bothered to prepare for an encounter. But it was her eyes, a mix of desperation and determination, that truly unsettled him. "Jack," she declared, urgency lacing her voice. "I need my keys. This is my house." The absurdity of her statement hung suspended in the air between them, suddenly transforming the peaceful morning into something fraught with tension and confusion. Jack's heart raced as he processed her words, his mind struggling to reconcile this bizarre assertion with the reality of their neighborly history. As silence dripped uncomfortably between them, he felt an unsettling mixture of dread and indignation seep in. How had their relationship crumbled to this, a confrontation so surreal that it barely felt real? Jack stood paralyzed for a moment, wrestling with disbelief as he wondered just how far things had deteriorated between them to lead to this chaotic dawn. Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a sharp blade, filled with urgency and an unsettling assertiveness. "Jack, I need my keys right now. This is my house." Her eyes were wild, darting back and forth as if searching for validation that simply wasn't there. Jack stared at her, trying to comprehend the bizarre situation unfolding before him. The woman who had once shared meals and laughter with him now exuded an unmistakable hostility he had never witnessed before. "Your house?" Jack repeated incredulously, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel the disbelief creeping into his tone, laced with confusion. Karen's determination only seemed to grow in response, her posture shifting to one of defiance. She stepped closer, her insistence palpable as she gestured emphatically toward the home he had built his life around. "It's all a misunderstanding," she proclaimed, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "You don't understand how this works. We were supposed to share everything. I helped you fix that fence. I helped you paint the living room. You can't just kick me out." Jack could see her frustration boiling over, her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she struggled to articulate what felt like a deeply ingrained sense of entitlement. The absurdity of Karen's claims hung heavily in the air between them. Jack felt a mixture of anger and pity as he watched her unravel. He remembered the moments they had spent together, a bond that once felt so strong now lay shattered at the feet of this outrageous accusation. Her desperation painted a clearer picture of a woman on the edge, but there was no denying the reality. This was his home, and she was treating it as if it were a shared fantasy gone awry. "Karen, this isn't your house," he finally asserted, firming up his resolve amid the chaos of her demands. "You need to leave." But even as he spoke those words, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was merely a symptom of much larger issues swirling beneath the surface, issues that threatened not only his sense of security but also his understanding of who Karen had become. As Jack stood there, the weight of Karen's outrageous claim pressed down on him like a heavy fog, clouding his thoughts and amplifying his confusion. He felt as if he were caught in a surreal dream where logic had been upended. How could someone he once considered a friend now stand before him, unleashing such wild accusations? His heart raced, not just from the shock of her words but from the disorientation swelling within him. Jack's mind began to spiral as he mentally retraced their history, a friendship that had turned sour, memories of laughter now overshadowed by escalating tension. Each time Karen had come over, there had been a glimmer of normalcy, but mingled with it was an unsettling undercurrent that he had tried to ignore. Now her demand felt like the culmination of everything he had feared deep down. "Is this really happening?" he thought, struggling to reconcile the kind woman who used to give him baked goods with the frantic, agitated person standing in front of him, demanding keys to a house she did not own. In that moment, disbelief washed over him, followed closely by a wave of frustration. How could she possibly think this was her house? Was it desperation driving her, or some sort of mental break? His stomach churned as anger mingled with pity. He wanted to shake her and shout that this was his home, his sanctuary, but instead, he felt paralyzed by uncertainty. What did this mean for him? The thought raced through his mind, could their relationship ever be repaired? Jack watched Karen's erratic behavior minute by minute, her desperation painted a picture of someone unraveling. Yet here he was, forced to defend his ownership while grappling with painful nostalgia for better times. As an uncomfortable silence stretched between them, Jack wrestled with his emotions, his sense of security crumbling as he faced this bewildering reality. All he could think was how quickly things could fall apart and how little warning one might receive before chaos descends on what was once a peaceful life. Jack took a deep breath, desperately trying to steady his racing heart as he faced Karen. "Look, Karen," he began, his voice unsteady but firm, "this is my house. I bought it 5 years ago. You know that." Karen's expression flickered, momentarily revealing a hint of uncertainty beneath her fierce exterior. "But we were supposed to share everything," she exclaimed, her hands gesturing wildly as if trying to encompass the very essence of their past friendship. "You can't just decide this is all yours now. I helped you, how can you just forget that?" Jack felt a mix of frustration and pity wash over him. "I haven't forgotten anything," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "But sharing tools or helping with chores doesn't mean you own my house. You need to understand that." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jack feared her desperation would turn into something more volatile. "You think you can just deny me? I've been here longer than you," she shot back, her voice rising with each word. "What do you think people will say?" "Karen, please," Jack said, trying to defuse the situation with calmness rather than confrontation. "This isn't a public debate, it's about what's legally true." He could see the anger in her eyes but also the cracks forming in her bravado. "We can talk about this like adults." "What do you want me to say?" she replied bitterly. That I'm losing my mind? That I have no right to feel hurt? Her voice trembled slightly at the end, revealing some of the vulnerability hidden beneath her aggressive demeanor. Yes. I want you to recognize that this isn't how things work. Jack urged gently but firmly. It's okay to feel frustrated, but lashing out won't help either of us. Silence settled between them once again as Karen took a step back, biting her lip as if processing his words for the first time. The tension hung heavy in the air as both grappled with their emotions, a flicker of understanding amid chaos lingering just out of reach, but Jack knew they had a long way to go before any kind of resolution could be reached. As the silence lingered, the tension between Jack and Karen grew thicker. He could see her brow furrowing, the emotional storm brewing behind her eyes as she wrestled with his words. You just don't get it, do you? She snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. This isn't just about a house. It's about everything we've shared. Jack felt a surge of frustration well up within him. What we shared doesn't give you ownership over my home, he replied, his tone rising as feelings of helplessness morphed into anger. With each exchange, it became increasingly apparent that their miscommunication was spiraling into a confrontation neither had anticipated. Karen took a step forward, her posture rigid with indignation. So you're telling me all those times I helped you meant nothing? You think you can just discard our friendship because it suits you? Her voice cracked slightly, revealing undercurrents of betrayal that echoed through the air. Helping doesn't mean I owe you anything. Jack shot back, the heat of the moment clouding his judgment. This wasn't just about property anymore, it was systematically dismantling the fragile remnants of their past connection. With every word, Jack sensed that they were venturing into dangerous territory, the kind where respect could easily turn to resentment. Karen's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she struggled to maintain her composure. I thought friends stood by each other. You're leaving me no choice but to fight for what's rightfully mine. Her desperation gave way to an edge of menace that made Jack's stomach churn. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. A neighbor had come to check on the commotion, but neither Jack nor Karen noticed. They were lost in their escalating conflict, oblivious to the outside world bearing witness to their unraveling relationship. Jack felt panic set in. This could spiral out of control quickly if they didn't find common ground soon. The stakes had risen higher than he ever intended, and he feared what might happen next if they continued down this path fueled by misunderstanding and buried grievances. In that charged moment, it became evident, the conversation was no longer merely about keys or ownership, it had transformed into a battleground for emotions left unresolved and friendships nearly extinguished. As Jack closed the door, the weight of the confrontation with Karen settled heavily on his shoulders. His mind raced as he paced the living room, thoughts swirling around the escalating conflict and the potential consequences of her demands. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no longer just a personal dispute, it had become a complex web of emotions and misunderstandings that required careful navigation. Sitting down at his kitchen table, Jack's gaze fell on his phone, contemplating whether to reach out for advice. Maybe I should call someone, he thought, feeling an urgent need for perspective. He considered calling his brother, who had always been a steady voice in chaotic times, someone who could help him see things more clearly. Would his brother understand the gravity of the situation? It was difficult to explain over the phone, especially when Jack himself was still trying to make sense of it all. Then there was Lisa, his close friend who had a knack for seeing both sides of an argument. She might offer insights into Karen's state of mind or suggest ways to approach the situation without further escalating tensions. But what if she sides with Karen, he pondered, anxiety creeping back in. Jack felt trapped between wanting support and fearing judgment. The thought of seeking legal advice also crossed his mind, an unsettling idea that hinted at how serious things had become. However, the idea of involving lawyers felt like a betrayal of their former friendship, something that both disgusted and frightened him. Wasn't there still a chance to resolve this amicably? He envisioned walking over to Karen's house with a mediator or perhaps their mutual friends present to help negotiate some clarity. But even considering such measures felt daunting. Jack shook his head as if to clear away the spiraling thoughts. I need to think clearly before making any decisions, he resolved. Yet, each minute that passed felt like a countdown to an inevitable showdown, and he knew that without proper guidance or intervention, he risked losing not just his home but the remnants of the friendship they once shared. The struggle for resolution loomed closer than ever, and he understood that finding a way forward was paramount if he had any hope of salvaging his peace of mind, and perhaps even Karen's as well. As Jack sat at the kitchen table, the weight of his thoughts began to shift. While he had been consumed by frustration and anger towards Karen, he couldn't shake the feeling that there might be deeper misunderstandings at play, miscommunications that could have contributed to her erratic behavior. He remembered a conversation they had a few months ago when she mentioned her financial struggles. "I just can't pay my bills sometimes," she had confided in him over coffee, her voice tinged with embarrassment. At the time, Jack had offered his support, not realizing how heavily these words might weigh on her mind. Had she interpreted his kindness as an implied agreement about sharing their properties? He recalled how she often made comments about wanting to live in a more communal way, perhaps reflecting her own insecurities about stability and ownership. Suddenly, it all clicked into place for Jack. Karen had always been passionate about community, whether through block parties or discussions of joint home improvements, but he'd misread her enthusiasm as merely neighborly friendship. Now he wondered if those exchanges had planted seeds of entitlement in her mind. Perhaps she viewed their interactions not just as gestures of goodwill but as a foundation for claiming a shared space. That notion unsettled him further. Had Karen been clinging to the notion that they were partners in some sense? The thought sent chills down his spine. What if she believed that their shared memories somehow secured her rights to his home? Jack realized he needed to address this perception head-on if there was any hope of resolution. Reflecting on their last heated exchange, he recalled how desperate she sounded when bringing up their past connections. "You helped me paint, I helped you fix your fence," she argued fiercely, almost as if those acts granted her a stake in his property. It was all making sense now. Her wild accusations stemmed from an emotional turmoil woven into their history together. Jack understood that for any resolution to take place, they would need to clarify these misunderstandings directly and honestly. If only they could have an open dialogue devoid of accusations, a chance to lay bare the roots of this conflict and find common ground once more before everything fell apart completely. Determined to resolve the conflict, Jack decided to approach Karen the next day. He needed to confront their misunderstandings head-on and find a way to clear the air. With a sense of urgency, he knocked on her door, heart pounding as he waited for her to answer. When she opened the door, there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes followed by a guarded expression. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone wary but lacking the previous hostility. "I think we need to talk," Jack replied, trying to project calmness despite the tension that lingered between them. When Karen hesitated, he continued, "I want us to find a way past this, all of it." She stepped back slightly, allowing him entry but keeping her arms crossed defensively. Jack took a deep breath and began explaining his perspective. "I realized that our conversations about community and sharing might have led to some misunderstandings. I offered help out of friendship, not because I believed we were partners in ownership." Karen's brow furrowed as she listened, and Jack could see her processing his words. "But I thought, when you helped me with things around my place, it meant something more," she finally admitted, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "I didn't mean for it to get messy like this." "I know," Jack responded gently. "But we both need to be clear about boundaries and what those gestures mean moving forward. This is my home, and I care about you as a neighbor and friend, but we can't let those feelings blur reality." A silence settled between them as Karen absorbed his honesty. Gradually, her posture relaxed as if the weight of their conflict was lifting ever so slightly. "You're right," she said quietly, tears welling in her eyes. "I've been struggling so much lately. But I never wanted it to come to this." Jack softened at her admission and stepped closer, realizing they were both wrestling with their own fears and insecurities. "Let's work together on repairing this," he suggested earnestly. They agreed that open communication would be essential moving forward, both for their relationship and for their individual peace of mind. As they talked through their grievances and concerns over coffee, an invitation extended by Jack, an underlying bond began to re-emerge. It was clear that clarity would not erase their troubles overnight, but there was hope that they could navigate their path forward together without further misunderstandings or accusations standing in the way. As Jack reflected on the tumultuous events that had transpired, he found himself grappling with several important lessons. The clash with Karen had forced him to confront not only the issue of property rights but also the complexities of interpersonal relationships. He realized how vital it was to establish clear boundaries, both in his home and in his interactions with others. The experience highlighted for him the significance of communication. Had he and Karen engaged in more open conversations earlier on, perhaps misunderstandings could have been avoided, sparing them both from the emotional turmoil that had unfolded. Jack recognized that kindness could sometimes be misinterpreted. What he viewed as gestures of goodwill could be seen by others as an invitation to claim ownership or entitlement. He also learned about the fragility of relationships and how quickly they can deteriorate when misunderstandings go unaddressed. The confrontation with Karen served as a stark reminder that unresolved issues fester and can lead to unexpected and distressing scenarios. Jack now understood that it was crucial to listen actively and express his own feelings clearly, ensuring that miscommunications were addressed before they escalated into conflict. Additionally, he reflected on the importance of empathy. Karen's struggles had a significant impact on her behavior, and while her demands were unreasonable, they stemmed from her own insecurities and desperation. This realization deepened his compassion for her situation and reminded him that everyone is fighting their own battles beneath the surface. As he looked ahead, Jack felt a renewed commitment to fostering healthy relationships built on mutual respect and understanding. He resolved to be more proactive in communicating his boundaries, not just with Karen but with all those in his life. The confrontation may have been painful, but it ultimately served as a catalyst for personal growth, a chance to emerge wiser and more mindful of his connections with others as he navigated through life's complexities. As Jack and Karen navigated the aftermath of their confrontation, both recognized that this incident would shape their future interactions. For Jack, it served as a pivotal moment that highlighted the importance of maintaining clear boundaries and fostering open lines of communication. He understood now that being neighborly involves not just kindness but also setting expectations to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflict. Moving forward, Jack was determined to approach his relationship with Karen, and others in his life, with renewed empathy and clarity. He aimed to be proactive in discussing any issues before they escalated, believing that such conversations could help preserve not only their neighborly bond but also encourage a more supportive atmosphere in the community. Karen, too, had gained insights from this situation. The realization that her actions were rooted in her struggles with insecurity and financial instability opened her eyes to the potential impact of her behavior on others. She expressed a desire to rebuild trust with Jack and be more transparent about her feelings moving forward. This newfound awareness promised a path toward healing for both of them. On a broader scale, Jack's experience reflects common challenges faced in property disputes and interpersonal conflicts. Many individuals find themselves ensnared in similar misunderstandings, often driven by unvoiced expectations or emotional distress. This incident serves as a reminder of the critical importance of communication, whether articulating one's needs or actively listening to others, to mitigate conflicts before they spiral out of control. As neighbors and friends, Jack and Karen set an example for others who may find themselves in similar predicaments. Confrontation does not have to end in division. Through dialogue and understanding, paths can be forged toward resolution and mutual respect. By embracing these lessons, Jack hoped to inspire positivity not just within his relationship with Karen but throughout his community as well. Their journey had been fraught with turmoil, but it ultimately led them both towards personal growth and a shared commitment to fostering healthier ties moving forward.